Eleanor Burke adjusted her expensive scarf, feeling the luxurious fabric against her skin. The scarf was a gift from her latest admirer, a wealthy businessman who had no idea of her true intentions. She had a knack for attracting the right kind of attention, and she used it to her advantage. The chill of the winter air biting at her nose, she pulled the scarf tighter around her neck. The cold was something she could never get used to, no matter how many winters she endured. It was a stark reminder of the harshness of the world outside her carefully curated bubble of luxury. As she stepped into the warmth of the charity office, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The contrast between the biting cold outside and the cozy interior was almost jarring. She took a moment to savor the warmth before focusing on the task at hand. The place reeked of desperation, a scent she usually avoided. The cluttered office was filled with the remnants of other people's lives, donations that spoke of hardship and struggle. It was a world far removed from her own, but today she had to immerse herself in it. But today she had a job to do, a job that required her to step out of her comfort zone and into the world of those less fortunate. It was a necessary evil, one that would ultimately benefit her greatly. She steeled herself, determined to see it through. A job that would make her very rich. The thought of the money waiting for her at the end of the charade was enough to keep her going. She had always been driven by the promise of wealth, and this was no different. She just had to play her part convincingly. The office was small, crammed with donated clothes and worn-out furniture. It was a far cry from the sleek, modern spaces she was used to. The sight of the old, mismatched furniture and the piles of clothes made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to stay focused. Eleanor wrinkled her nose at the musty smell. The air was thick with the scent of old fabric and dust, a combination that made her want to gag. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to show any weakness now. She could see the outline of a woman through a thin partition, hunched over a mountain of paperwork. The woman was clearly overworked, her shoulders slumped and her movements slow. It was a pitiful sight, one that made Eleanor feel a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. The woman, Margaret, was the sole employee and the only thing standing between Eleanor and a hefty sum of money. Margaret was dedicated to her work, a trait that Eleanor found both admirable and frustrating. She needed to find a way to get past her. Eleanor approached the partition, her designer boots clicking against the linoleum floor. The sound was sharp and authoritative, a stark contrast to the soft, shuffling steps of the other people in the office. She wanted to make an impression, to assert her presence. A smug smile played on her lips. She knew she had the upper hand, and she intended to use it. She had always been good at getting what she wanted, and this time would be no different. She just had to play her cards right. Margaret looked up, her face etched with worry lines, a stark contrast to Eleanor's perfectly Botoxed features. The difference between them was striking, a visual representation of the gap between their worlds. Margaret's eyes were tired, but there was a spark of determination in them. "Can I help you?" Margaret asked, her voice laced with exhaustion. It was clear that she was not used to dealing with people like Eleanor, and the strain was evident in her tone. She was trying to be polite, but there was an edge of wariness in her voice. "I believe you can," Eleanor purred, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. She had perfected the art of manipulation, and she knew exactly how to use her charm to get what she wanted. She leaned in slightly, her smile widening as she prepared to make her move. This was her game, and she intended to win. She had come too far to back down now, and she was determined to see it through to the end. The stakes were high, but she was confident in her ability to come out on top. She just had to stay focused and keep her eye on the prize. Eleanor had been eyeing the Hope for the Homeless Fund for months. It was a significant amount, enough to solve her financial woes and then some. The plan was simple, foolproof in her mind. She'd pose as a financial advisor, offering her services pro bono. "It's all perfectly legal, darling," she'd assured her reflection that morning, applying another layer of crimson lipstick. Just a little redirection. She knew Margaret, a kind soul with a heart of gold but no head for numbers, wouldn't suspect a thing. Eleanor, with her practiced charm and carefully crafted lies, easily convinced Margaret that she was a godsend. She spoke of investment opportunities, growth charts, and long-term financial security. Words Margaret desperately wanted to hear. Words that would ultimately lead her down a path of destruction. Eleanor's birthday arrived, a day she had been eagerly anticipating for weeks. She had planned every detail meticulously, ensuring that everything would be perfect. The date was circled in bright red on her calendar, a reminder of the special occasion, the day she'd successfully transferred the funds into her account. It was a significant amount, a culmination of her hard work and careful saving. She felt a sense of accomplishment as she saw the confirmation message on her screen, knowing that her financial goals were finally within reach. She celebrated with champagne and caviar, her conscience noticeably absent. The luxurious spread on her table was a stark contrast to the modest meals she usually had. She raised her glass in a solitary toast, savoring the moment of indulgence and the taste of success. A delivery arrived, a gift from a distant relative. The package was wrapped in elegant paper, adorned with a delicate ribbon. Eleanor's curiosity was piqued as she carefully unwrapped it, wondering what could be inside. A heavy, leather-bound book, its pages brittle with age. The cover was worn, but the craftsmanship was evident. It had an air of mystery, as if it held secrets from a bygone era. It was titled simply Our Town. The title was embossed in gold, standing out against the dark leather. It seemed to beckon her to explore its contents, to uncover the stories within. Intrigued, she flipped through the yellowed pages. Each page was filled with handwritten entries, the ink faded but still legible. The book seemed to be a chronicle of the town's history, a record of events and people long forgotten. The book chronicled the town's history, each entry handwritten in faded ink. The handwriting was elegant, with flourishes that spoke of a different time. As she read, she felt a connection to the past, as if the voices of those who had written the entries were speaking to her. As she delved deeper, a chill ran down her spine. The entries began to take a darker turn, detailing events that were unsettling. She felt a sense of foreboding, as if the book was revealing secrets that were meant to stay hidden. The entries detailed the town's treatment of the homeless, stories of neglect, of people being turned away when they needed help the most. The words painted a grim picture of a community that had failed its most vulnerable members, of indifference, of cruelty. The accounts were heartbreaking, describing how the homeless were often ignored, their pleas for help falling on deaf ears. It was a stark reminder of the harsh realities that many faced. One entry, dated 1888, described a homeless man freezing to death just outside the town hall. The details were harrowing, painting a vivid picture of his final moments. He had sought shelter, but found none, his life ending in the cold and darkness. The words seemed to jump out at her. His pleas for help were ignored. The entry was written with a sense of urgency, as if the writer wanted to ensure that this tragedy was not forgotten. Eleanor felt a deep sense of sorrow as she read, the weight of the words pressing down on her, his suffering, invisible to those who could have made a difference. The book was a stark reminder of the consequences of indifference, a call to action for those who read it. Eleanor closed the book, her mind racing with thoughts of how she could make a difference in her own community. That night, Eleanor couldn't shake off the unease. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the silence more profound. Every creak of the old house felt amplified, echoing through the empty halls. She had always been sensitive to the unseen, but tonight was different. It was as if the very air was charged with a presence, something ancient and restless. She tried to read the book again, but the words seemed to writhe on the pages. They twisted and turned, forming shapes that made no sense, as if the book itself was alive and trying to communicate something beyond her understanding. The more she tried to focus, the more elusive the words became, slipping through her grasp like sand. The air grew heavy, the room colder. She could see her breath, each exhale a ghostly mist in the dim light. Frost began to creep along the edges of the window pane, a delicate lace of ice that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. It was as if the room itself was reacting to her presence, responding to her fear. Then she heard it, a soft whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the rustling of the leaves outside, but it was unmistakable. It was a plea, a cry for help that sent a shiver down her spine. She strained to hear more, but the whisper faded, leaving her in a tense silence. She turned around, heart pounding. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the voice. Every shadow seemed to move. Every corner held a potential threat. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead, her pulse racing as adrenaline surged through her veins. The window was open. Had someone been out there? The curtains billowed gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the stillness of the room. She approached the window cautiously, peering out into the darkness. The garden below was empty, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. She closed it, her hands trembling. The latch clicked into place, but it did little to ease her anxiety. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls of her sanctuary had been breached. The whisper echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the unseen presence that lurked just beyond her perception. The whispers grew louder, echoing around her. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony of voices that overlapped and intertwined. She covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was futile. The whispers penetrated her defenses, filling her mind with their insistent pleas. They were coming from the book. The pages glowed with an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was as if the book was a portal, a gateway to another realm where the voices resided. She felt a compulsion to open it, to delve deeper into its mysteries, despite the fear that gripped her heart. She tried to drop the book, but it clung to her hand as if with a life of its own. The cover was warm to the touch, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She tugged and pulled, but the book refused to let go, its grip tightening with every attempt to free herself. The room started to spin, her vision blurred, the walls and furniture blending into a dizzying whirl of colors and shapes. She felt herself being pulled into the vortex, the ground slipping away beneath her feet. It was as if the book was drawing her into its depths, consuming her very essence. Images flashed before her eyes, a young boy begging for food, his eyes hollow with hunger. She could feel his desperation, his longing for a morsel to ease the gnawing pain in his stomach. The scene shifted, morphing into another vision. An old woman shivering in the snow, her frail body wrapped in a thin blanket. The cold bit into her skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was alone, abandoned, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across lifetimes. A family huddled under a bridge. They clung to each other for warmth, their faces etched with worry and fatigue. The children's eyes were wide with fear, their parents' expressions a mix of determination and despair. These were not just images. They were memories, fragments of lives touched by suffering. Images from the book, but vivid, alive, horrifying. They seemed to leap off the pages, surrounding her, engulfing her in their reality. She could hear their cries, feel their pain, as if she were living their experiences. The book was a conduit, a bridge between her world and theirs, and it demanded her attention, her empathy, her very soul. Eleanor found herself pulled into the book, the world around her dissolving. She landed hard on the cold cobblestones of a street she recognized from the book. It was the town square, but from another era. People in old-fashioned clothes hurried past, their faces grim, their eyes vacant. She tried to call out, but no sound escaped her lips. She was invisible, a ghost in her own nightmare. Before her unfolded the tragedies she had read about, playing out in horrifying detail. She felt the despair of the young boy, the bone-chilling cold that claimed the old woman, the desperation of the family torn apart by hunger and homelessness. Each story, a punch to her gut, a mirror reflecting the consequences of her own actions.